Welcome to Jade, a captivating fantasy adventure written by D.H. Bristow. In this mystical tale, follow Jade as she embarks on a journey that will determine the fate of two worlds. Narrated by Victoria, we invite you to immerse yourself in this world of magic, danger, and destiny. Chapter 1. The Cradle of Secrets. The Cessation Festival was nearly over as the first light of dawn broke across the sky. The village streets were still dotted with laughter and scattered conversations, but the celebration was winding down. Small figures, barely visible in the dim morning light, skipped and danced along the mossy pathways, their energy fading as they made their way home to sleep off the festival's excitement. At the heart of it all, the Willow Tree Inn was still buzzing with activity. Travellers, weary from their journeys, were preparing to retire to their rooms, each one intricately carved into the mighty trunk of the old willow tree. The inn glowed softly, as small lights flickered in the windows that faced a crystal-clear stream. The willow itself, ancient and wise, stretched its protective branches over the water, occasionally dipping its boughs to create delicate ripples that danced across the stream's surface. The entire village was nestled in the protective embrace of Green Mountain Cove, where the homes, expertly carved into the willows lining the banks, stood tall and proud. Each tree boasted a beautifully crafted door, opening into spacious homes with polished wooden floors, spiral staircases, and soft glowing lanterns. Thick moss paved the roads, and the fragrance of water lilies gently swaying in the crystal pond filled the cool night air. Despite its quiet charm, Willow Village was renowned as one of the largest and most popular destinations for magical folk. And the Willow Tree Inn, known to house some of the most famous and strangest beings, was host to something extraordinary that night, deep within its roots. Phaon, Rostel, Loxia and Goldrun had already retreated to the Verity Room, a hidden chamber nestled within the roots of the inn. The air hummed with tension as they prepared for what was to come, an event that marked not just the end of a festival, but the beginning of a new era. These four were no ordinary fairies. They were the oldest and wisest of their kind. Legends whispered that they had been alive in the days when fairies and humans coexisted peacefully, before greed, war and power tore them apart. Tonight, the four elders were preparing for their final act. The village outside had grown silent as the lights from the homes flickered out one by one. Only the Verity Room remained alive with energy. A soft knock echoed through the chamber, and Loxia rose from her seat to answer the door. "Who is it?" she called, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. "It's Ilona," came the reply. "Jarid, Destan, Lemore and Bravley are here with me." Loxia opened the door, revealing 5 fairies, each strikingly different from the other, representatives of far-flung clans. They entered quietly, taking their seats around the large wooden table, their eyes flickering with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. The meeting had yet to officially begin, and for a moment they exchanged stories of their journeys while Ilona, the inn's bubbly hostess, laid out refreshments before them. Her curiosity was piqued. After all, it wasn't every day that fairies from such distant lands gathered at the inn, let alone in the company of the village's wisest elders. However, she knew better than to pry. With a quiet nod, she excused herself, closing the door firmly behind her. Goldrun, the eldest of the Willow Village residents and known far and wide as the most powerful earth wizard fairy, sat closest to the crackling fire. His keen green-brown eyes sparkled as he observed the newcomers. The flickering flames cast a warm reddish glow across his weathered face, making him appear both mysterious and wise. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a strong, handsome face, his jaw set with determination as he turned his attention to the fire. Dressed in long, flowing silver robes, his sword-like staff rested against his chair. Slowly, he stood and turned to face the group. "We have a long day ahead of us," he began, his deep voice commanding attention. "Perhaps we can pass the time more easily if we hear of the adventures you all had on your journeys here. After all, Adventure and storytelling are at the heart of what we do. Phaon, with his wispy white hair and flowing beard, nodded in agreement. Everything about Phaon seemed to flow, his hair, his robes, even his staff, which shimmered as if caught in an invisible breeze. His piercing blue-green eyes rested on Ilona. "You've travelled the furthest, all the way from Pebble Creek, haven't you?" he asked, his voice soft and almost ethereal. Ilona smiled as she flicked her long golden hair behind her, the firelight catching the blue in her eyes. She stood, her pink-tinted silver wings shimmering in the glow of the fire. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm and melodic. "I left at the second rising of the sun after I was summoned by Rostal." She stepped toward the fire, her gold-laced pink dress catching the light as she moved with the grace of a dancer. "Not much to tell of my journey, except I stopped at Coldwater Crest. There's talk that Grimlore hasn't sent any goblins past there in some time. Rumours are swirling that he's planning something, perhaps an attack on Green Mountain Cove." Goldrun's sharp eyes flashed with a hint of gold as he looked at her. "If that's true," he said gravely, "he may succeed this time. His powers have grown stronger, and ours weaker." The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming tense. Ilona returned to her seat beside Rostal, whose long golden hair cascaded over the back of her chair. Rostal's sea-blue eyes were lost in thought, her mind clearly preoccupied with the danger looming over Green Mountain Cove. Jarid stood up, his tall, slender frame casting a commanding presence. "Green Mountain Cove is well protected, but if Grimlore's powers have indeed grown, we have cause for concern." He stood beside his chair, embodying the traits of a formidable warrior. Strength, charm, protection, and diplomacy radiated from him. Jarid was the epitome of leadership, possessing the 4 elemental energies: earth, wind, fire, and water. "I have travelled far and wide these past months and have seen significant changes. The fairy folk are gripped by fear, sensing that something is shifting. It's becoming increasingly difficult for them to travel unnoticed." Destan strolled over to the refreshments and poured himself a glass of blueberry juice. As he bent forward, his wispy light blonde hair fell over his green eyes. "I too have been on the road for days and have observed these changes. But something strange is brewing. I don't think we need to worry excessively. Look around. This gathering hasn't happened in hundreds of years. Fate, fortune, and destiny are about to unfold." Goldrun cast a glance at the other wizard fairies, then turned toward Bravley. "Perhaps you should share your adventures, Bravley. You must be exhausted after all that travel." Bravley chuckled. "I have indeed travelled far, but these days catching the right flight isn't easy. I stick to the one airline because they have the best service. Besides, I don't fly on Wednesdays. Bad luck day for travelling." "What?" Jarid exclaimed, incredulous. "You can't take airplane flights like humans. That's absurd." "Why not?" Bravley shot back, a mischievous glint in his hazelnut green eyes as he brushed aside his thick brown hair. "I had a million things to do before I left, and I was running late. I've done it 1,000 times before. It's not absurd at all. It's quite invigorating. Remember, I don't have wings like you lot, so I can't just glide and take a rest. But look at all of you, exhausted from your trips while I'm fully refreshed." Jarid gestured toward Bravley, whose brown and gold leather tunic and golden-strapped quiver highlighted his warrior spirit. "You're a fairy, Bravley, not a human. We don't do things like that. It's not very fairy-like. But I must admit you do look refreshed. Maybe there's something to this airline story." Bravley shrugged, his carefree demeanour shining through. He was the embodiment of a bold and daring fairy. A soft musical rustle filled the room as Lamore shifted in her chair. Suddenly, her fiery radiance illuminated the space. "Have you noticed, Bravley, how relaxed humans get on airplanes when one of us is around?" she said, her deep blue eyes sparkling with mischief. Everyone erupted in laughter, and Jarid gasped in mock horror. "Not you too?" "Well, why not?" Lamore replied, a playful smile on her lips. "It's quite convenient, especially if you're in a hurry." All right, Goldrun interjected with a chuckle. As long as you all arrived on time and without incident, it matters not what mode of transport got you here. Now let's get down to the matter at hand. They took their places around the table, the warm glow of the fire casting a cozy light on their faces as Goldrun opened the meeting. The 4 wise wizard fairies sat closest to the fire, their expressions turning serious. Phaon cleared his throat. You have all been summoned here to witness and participate in an act that has only happened once before, back in the time of Merlin, thousands of years ago. This time, however, the powers will be even stronger. As you know, it is time for Goldrun, Rostal, Phaon and me to depart from this life and enter the next. Before we do, we need to appoint new leaders and caretakers for our positions. Grimlore's powers are intensifying as he draws the power of the crystal toward himself. We are unsure how he is doing this, but we can be certain that our power is waning. Our invisibility and magic are growing weaker. If he takes Green Mountain Cove and controls the crystal, life as we know it will end. We will become visible to all humans, and our powers will be useless to save us or to protect the humans from themselves. Rostal stood up, her voice firm yet reassuring. But all is not lost. We have devised a plan to thwart Grimlore's possession of the crystal, hopefully once and for all. Each of you has a duty to perform. This journey will be long, treacherous and fraught with difficulties. It is a great honor bestowed upon all of you. You have each been carefully chosen based on your proven abilities, powers and characters. But if anyone feels unprepared for this task, you may leave now. Know this, not a word of what has been said here today is to be repeated. The consequences would be devastating for all our kind. No one moved. Silence stretched as the air seemed to hum with the weight of what was about to happen. All eyes were fixed on the 4 wise fairies, their expressions unreadable, their powers palpable. Before we continue, you will all pledge an oath, Loxia intoned, her voice sharp and commanding, and protect this secret with your lives. By the elements of earth, wind, fire and water, it is done, they all chorused, the weight of their words hanging in the air like a spell. Goldrun, with his earthy aura and grounded presence, rose first. He gripped his sword-like staff and pointed it squarely at Bravley. I hereby appoint and anoint you by the elements of earth, Bravley the warrior, he declared, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Bravley knelt, his head lowered in acceptance. The tip of Goldrun's staff flared with a bright, silvery blue light, a force of nature in its own right. It shot across the room like lightning, striking Bravley. The force sent him skidding backward near the door, but he rose effortlessly, his wings now aglow with a sharp, radiant blue. The glow dimmed, and Bravley calmly returned to his seat, now emanating a quiet, deadly readiness. Phaon was next, his long, ethereal white staff catching the light as misty clouds gathered around the orb at its peak. He swept it forward with a gust of wind, the energy around him crackling. I hereby appoint and anoint you by the elements of wind, Destan the philosopher, he said, his voice rising like a sudden storm. Destan knelt, but before he could brace himself, a powerful gust flung him across the room. He landed, breathless but alive, gathering himself with a smile as he reclaimed his seat. Rostal followed, her presence a soothing, flowing force, as her crystal staff exuded the most intoxicating fragrance. She turned to Ilona, the petals of the rose atop her staff collecting shimmering dewdrops. I hereby appoint and anoint you by the elements of water, Ilona, the enlightened, she said, and a cool mist rolled over the table, wrapping around Ilona in a silvery, wet embrace. Ilona bowed her head as the mist faded, and her eyes shone with new clarity. Loxia was last, a force of fire and intensity, radiating with a red glow. His amber staff, crowned by the eternal ruby, hissed to life as he pointed it at Lemore. I hereby appoint and anoint you by the elements of fire, Lemore, the passionate, Loxia said, his voice a controlled flame. Sparks danced from the ruby, swirling like embers around Lammer before settling into his skin, leaving him with a warm, golden red aura. Finally, all 4 wise fairies turned toward Jarid. The air grew thick with power as they joined forces. "Hold up," Jarid interrupted with a raised eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. "This isn't gonna hurt, is it?" The wise fairies exchanged amused glances, their shoulders lifting in a collective shrug. "We hereby appoint and anoint you by all 4 elements, earth, wind, fire, and water, Jarid the Protector," they said in unison. A rainbow of colours formed above them, spiralling down toward Jarid. He stood, bracing himself, but the rainbow wrapped around him with a force too great. It lifted him into the air, swirling until the colours disappeared inside him. With a crash, Jarid hit the floor unconscious. "Oops," Goldrun muttered, scratching his head. "That might have been a bit much. Let's make him comfortable and grab some refreshments while we wait." After some time, Jarid stirred. He stood on wobbly legs, his face awash in a swirl of colours. "You look like you've been through a mixed-colour washing machine," Goldrun chuckled. "Pretty much what it feels like," Jarid grumbled, reclaiming his chair. Jarid shifted in his seat, still dazed from the anointment. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. They shimmered like he had been dipped in rainbow glitter. "I'm sparkling, for crying out loud," he muttered under his breath. "Well, this is unexpected. How exactly am I supposed to go unnoticed looking like a walking light show?" Bravley stifled a laugh, nudging Destan, who was unsuccessfully attempting to keep a straight face. "I don't know, Jarid. Maybe your new power is to dazzle enemies into submission. Just hit them with a pose, and bam, they'll be blinded by the fabulousness." Jarid shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still shimmering with faint colours from his anointment. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. His skin still seemed to catch the light in strange ways. Bravley, lounging comfortably with his arms crossed, raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Oh, I wouldn't worry too much. I'm sure the goblins will appreciate the new colourful you. Might make their aim better in the dark." Destan, sipping his blueberry juice, didn't bother to hide his grin. "Maybe you can blind them with brilliance. Save us all a battle." Jarid shot him a sidelong glance. "Brilliance? Is that what we're calling it now?" "I was going for intimidating presence, but I seem to have ended up in Festival of Lights." Goldrun chuckled softly. "I wouldn't fret, Jarid. You'll blend in soon enough. Or not. There's a certain charm in standing out." "Easy for you to say," Jarid muttered, still staring at his iridescent reflection in his goblet. "You get to stay stoically earthy while I look like I've been dipped in gemstones." Bravley leaned forward, grinning. "I think it suits you. After all, if you can't beat Grimlore with brute force, you might as well dazzle him into submission." Ilona, seated quietly beside Rastal, couldn't suppress a smile, or at the very least confuse him. Jarid sighed, resigned to the teasing, though a hint of humour danced in his eyes. "Great. Battle strategy number 1. Confusion by radiance. I'll put that on my list." Goldrun waved a hand, his expression turning slightly more serious, though the twinkle in his eye remained. "Enough of this. We have more pressing matters than your current shimmer. We need to focus." Rastal spoke, her voice calm and even, drawing everyone's attention back to the gravity of the situation. "Grimlore may be stronger than ever, but he is still predictable in one way. He craves control. He will stop at nothing to possess the crystal, and with it our world and theirs would be lost." Destan, always the philosopher, leaned back, his eyes thoughtful beneath his tousled hair. "It's strange, isn't it? The way power attracts those who believe they can handle it, when history has shown, time and again, they cannot. Grimlore is nothing if not a reminder of that flaw." Bravley sighed dramatically, brushing his hand through his hair as if contemplating a heavy thought. "And yet here we are, ready to stop him. The universe must love irony." Lama, who had been quiet until now, shifted in her chair and added, "The universe loves balance, not irony. It's up to us to make sure that balance remains intact. Grimlore seeks to tilt everything in his favour. We cannot allow that." Bravley grinned mischievously. Right, and that's where our heroic airline traveller comes in. Jarid shot him a look. Still going on about that? I'm sure flying with humans is exhilarating, Bravley, but some of us have wings or magic. We don't need in-flight snacks and complimentary beverages. Bravley stretched out lazily, feigning offence. Well, excuse me for being practical. Not all of us are blessed with endless stamina or, wings. Sometimes you've got to get creative. Destan, clearly enjoying himself, chimed in. You do realise there's something uniquely unfairy-like about taking a human airplane, right? What's next? Room service? Bravley shrugged, unbothered. As long as the room has a decent view, why not? Rostal interjected, her tone light but firm. Let's not get distracted. Whether by air or by magic, you're all here now, and that's what matters. The task ahead is daunting enough without bickering about travel preferences. Jarid, now mostly back to his usual self, straightened in his chair. She's right. We have a real enemy out there, and Grimlore won't care how any of us got here. What matters is what we do next. Goldran nodded, his face turning solemn. Indeed, the journey ahead will be treacherous. Each of you will be tasked with finding the elemental artifacts that Grimlore seeks. If he gains control of even one, it could tip the scales irrevocably. Lamore leaned forward, her expression fierce. And where exactly are these artifacts? I assume they're not lying around in plain sight, waiting for us. Loxia answered, his voice low and serious. They've been hidden for centuries, scattered across both the fairy and human worlds. You'll have to rely on your wits, your strengths, and each other. Grimlore's forces will be relentless in trying to find them. Bravley raised a hand, his expression mockingly serious. Just one more question. Are these artifacts the sort of thing that fit in carry-on luggage? Asking for a friend. Destan groaned, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Bravley, if you make one more travel joke, I might just send you on a one-way trip to Grimlore's lair myself. Goldran let out a deep, indulgent sigh. As long as we avoid excess baggage fees, we should be fine. Rosdale cut in once more, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. If you all focus as much on the quest as you do on teasing each other, we might just stand a chance. The humour faded slowly from the room as the weight of their task settled over them once again. The journey was about to begin, and the fate of both their worlds hung in the balance. Rostal, whose quiet presence often anchored the room, finally spoke. Her voice was as gentle as a breeze but carried the weight of ancient wisdom. Grimlore is no fool. He knows how to sow chaos among humans, playing on their fears and desires. If he succeeds in gaining control of the crystal, he will not only strip us of our power but plunge the human world into darkness. Ilona frowned, her usually bright demeanour clouded with concern. But why would he want to hurt the humans? What's in it for him? Goldran answered, his face growing grim. Power. Grimlore believes that by dominating both worlds he can reshape them to his liking. He wants to control the balance of life itself, to bend reality as he sees fit. The crystal holds the key to that power. This is a battle we cannot avoid, and we need each and every one of you to play your part. Jarid, who was now mostly free from his rainbow shimmer, straightened in his chair, his expression growing serious. So, what's the plan? Loxia glanced at each of them before speaking. The journey will be long and dangerous. All of you will be sent to retrieve the elemental artifacts that Grimlore needs to complete his control of the crystal. These artifacts have been hidden for centuries, scattered across both our realm and the human world. He continued. A long time ago, humans and fairies lived in harmony. We helped them with their crops, cared for their animals, kept the balance, then Grimlore showed up. He poisoned their hearts, turned them against us with greed and vengeance. Back then, we were powerful, but too forgiving, too naive. Slowly, things got worse. Our magic began to fade. Loxia's face darkened. We came together and used our last bit of power to create the crystal. It was hidden in Green Mountain Cove to protect it. The crystal is the source of all our magic, and it's how we've survived. But Grimlore's been drawing on it, weakening us. He's after it, and we can't let that happen. Goldrun put a hand on Jarid's shoulder. Time is slipping through our fingers like grains of sand, and we have no choice but to act swiftly. Goldrun began, his voice steady yet heavy with unspoken truths. As we prepare to depart from this world, we must weave our essence into the crystal, safeguarding its power from the encroaching darkness. You will carry the strength of all 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. Yet there is a greater force at play here, one intertwined with your destiny. This source will remain hidden until the moment it is needed most. Your mission is to protect it and to assist in its awakening. Should we fail in our task, a shadow looms that is more formidable than you can imagine, one that seeks to consume everything we hold dear. The room fell silent again as the weight of their mission settled over them. They all knew what was coming. The battle for the crystal, and the fate of both realms, was about to begin. The light faded slowly from the room as the weight of their task settled over them once again. The journey was about to begin, and the fate of both their worlds hung in the balance. "Well," Jarid said finally, his voice steady, "if we're going to save the world, we might as well get started." Goldrun nodded, his gaze sweeping over the group. Then it settled. "We leave at first light." And with that, the meeting concluded, each fairy carrying the silent knowledge that their light-hearted banter, though welcome, might soon be replaced with the hard realities of the battle to come. As the evening deepened, the Verity Room emptied, and everyone went to rest before the cessation ceremony. In the darkening forest, the 4 wise fairies led their successors toward the ceremonial clearing. Goldrun, in the centre, carried a heavy, slightly glowing bag at his side. Jarid's sharp eyes scanned their surroundings, making sure they weren't being followed. When they finally arrived, the wise fairies formed a circle around him. They raised their staffs, calling upon the elements. "Upon this magical earth we stand, to call upon you hand in hand. With eyes lifted toward the sky, the wind brings forth a mighty sigh, while sparks ignite with a fiery force to cast from all 4 a powerful source." A bolt of lightning shot down from the heavens, striking the earth at Jarid's feet. When the light faded, a titanium staff stood glowing in the soil. Jarid knelt, running his hand over its smooth surface, caressing the crystal wizard figure at its crown, before pulling it free from the earth. The wizards passed their staffs to their anointed successors. One by one, they knelt and accepted the burden placed upon them. The wizards gathered at the pedestal in the centre of the clearing. Their voices, soft at first, grew louder with each word, the air around them spinning with magical force. "Earth, wind, fire, and water, unite our powers to complete our departure. Unite our powers, fused as one. Give birth to the bearer, and let it be done." The wind howled, a brilliant light flaring into existence. Bravley and Jarid watched the edges of the clearing, while the others stood frozen in awe of the spectacle before them. In an instant, the light exploded, leaving only silence and darkness in its wake. The moon's pale glow finally pierced the stillness, revealing a small bundle cradled in the roots of an ancient tree. At dawn, the 5 chosen fairies, now carrying a precious bundle, arrived at the edge of the forest, where they approached a charming stone cottage with a thatched roof nestled just outside the human village. The air was rich with the earthy aromas of herbs and wildflowers as they strolled through fields dotted with livestock, the sounds of clucking chickens and lowing cattle blending into the morning symphony. Jarid hovered at the grand front stable door, which was adorned with a thick curtain of jasmine vines that draped over the entire facade like a green veil. Above his head hung a solid wrought-iron knocker shaped like a flower, weathered yet elegant. With a graceful sweep of his butterfly-like wings, Jarid ascended, grasped the knocker, and struck it with a forceful thud that reverberated through the air, followed by the gentle gurgle of a baby in a basket nearby. As the door creaked open, they looked up to see Mrs. Parsons, her eyes sparkling with warmth, as Jarid floated down to greet her with a broad smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Parsons. It's a pleasure to see you again." "Hello, sweeties. I was expecting you," she replied, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "Please do come in. Oh, is that her? Here, let me take her." Her motherly tone wrapped around them like a cozy blanket. They followed Maggie Parsons into the welcoming embrace of her country kitchen, where the scent of freshly baked biscuits filled the air, mingling with the lingering fragrance of wild herbs. She set the basket on the kitchen table and leaned over to peek inside, her eyes widening in delight. "Oh my, she's beautiful. Goldrun said you'd arrive today, so I've prepared her room, but first I think she needs something to eat, and I'm sure you all do too." While Maggie prepared the baby's bottle, the fairies settled around the table, savouring cups of honey tea and nibbling on warm ginger biscuits. "We still need to decide on a name for her," Lamor said, dabbing his mouth with a tiny napkin, the corners of his lips curving into a thoughtful smile. "Let's see," Maggie mused, lifting the baby from the basket and cradling her gently in her arms. The baby responded with a radiant smile, her eyes sparkling with innocence. "Here you are, darling. Drink up now," she encouraged, her voice a soft melody. "You have such beautiful green eyes, very unusual, I must say. And what's this curious silver lock of hair?" she added, gently running her fingers through the baby's thick brown locks. "I think we shall call you Jade. Yes, Jade Parsons, that will be your name." The 5 fairies gathered around Jade, showering her with affection, laughing when she ignored them, clearly focused on finishing her meal. With a peaceful sigh, Jade succumbed to slumber, and Maggie carefully carried her to her crib, the promise of magic and mystery lingering in the air. They all gathered in the cozy kitchen, the warmth of the space enveloping them as they delved into the night's strange occurrences and the daunting task that lay ahead. "Goldrun visited me not long ago," Maggie began, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "He asked me to look after Jade but wouldn't say much more, just that she's special and that I'd have help. And that's where you all come in, I suppose." She smiled, a mix of pride and uncertainty flickering in her hazel eyes. Ilona leaned forward, curiosity sparkling in her own. "Goldrun mentioned you were chosen because of your connection to his ancestors and your fierce passion for protecting our people. What's your link to them?" Maggie took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I'm a descendant of Goldrun's dryad ancestors, the tree-dwelling spirits. Druids often sought their wisdom. Hundreds of years ago, there were quite a few unions between fairies and humans, as you may know. My lineage traces back to a dryad who married my great-grandmother. Nothing too remarkable, except that I've inherited certain gifts, like the ability to see fairies and other mystical beings along with glimpses of the future." Bravley raised an eyebrow, glancing out the window at the gardens designed specifically for fairy folk, with enchanting little pergolas where they could sip tea and escape the chaos of the human world. "But what about the villagers? Don't they think you're a bit eccentric?" "They might think I'm a bit quirky, sure. But I've lived here my whole life, so they're probably used to my oddities by now," she replied, a wistful smile gracing her lips. "I've been alone since my husband passed away 8 years ago, dedicating myself to assisting fairies near and far. Goldrun, sometimes accompanied by Jarid, would often drop by to gather herbs for his potions. We shared wonderful conversations about life in Willow Village. I'm going to miss him terribly," she added, her voice softening. "He warned me that Jade needs protection. She's been anointed with a power beyond my imagination. I feel honoured, terrified, and excited all at once, especially since I've never had children of my own, and now I'm past childbearing age." Jarid nodded, his expression serious. Goldrun shared the tale of the times of Merlin, when the wise wizard fairies orchestrated a marriage between Brayson, a dryad wizard, and a human woman named Magentile. They had a son and a daughter, Zaran, destined to be our people's protector against dark forces, and his sister Magnol, your 17th generation ancestor. Maggie smiled. "You seem to know more about my family tree than I do. So, if Goldrun descends from Brayson and I descend from Magentile, then we're actually related. Can you imagine? A wizard fairy man and a human woman. Family. Ilona chimed in. From where I'm standing, Jade is uniquely tied to this lineage. She's descended from Goldrun, who traces back to Zeron, Brayson and Magentile. And since all fairy folk were intertwined in those days, that makes us all family. Our predecessors appointed us, and they are also Jade's ancestors. It's all quite strange, if you ask me. Bravley shrugged. No, it's not strange, it's confusing. After they wrapped up their breakfast and discussions, Destan rose and stretched. Thanks for the delicious breakfast, Maggie, but we should be on our way. We'll return in a couple of days to help with Jade. Yes, we have much to prepare before we fully devote ourselves to the task the wizards set for us. But we'll always be nearby if you need us, Jarid added, determination in his eyes. Maggie stepped outside the cottage, waving goodbye with her slender hand shielding her hazel eyes. She watched the fairies until they vanished from sight, then turned on her heel, heading back inside to check on Jade. Standing over the crib, her long, carefree blonde hair cascading around her shoulders, Maggie's heart swelled with love. A single tear slipped down her rosy cheek as she caught a fleeting glimpse of Jade's life mission. Wiping it away, she smiled softly. I won't waver in my devotion to you, my dear. I'll always be here if you need comfort. Your journey ahead will be filled with dark shadows that will test your strength and plunge you into feelings of isolation and despair. Jade opened her eyes and stared at Maggie for what felt like an eternity, as if absorbing every word. Then, with an enchanting smile, she lifted her arms, signaling to be picked up. The next day, as the sun crested the horizon, casting dappled light through the leaves, Maggie took Jade for a stroll through her enchanting gardens. The vibrant blooms seemed to sway with a life of their own, and just as she settled under the grand old oak, a couple of village ladies ambled over, curiosity sparkling in their eyes. Maggie's heart swelled with pride as she introduced them to her little charge. Well, ladies, meet Jade, the extraordinary baby I've been fortunate enough to foster. Isn't she stunning? Mrs. Longwell leaned closer to the pram, her expression lighting up. Absolutely delightful. Just look at those eyes. You must bring her to the village so my daughter can meet her. Soon they'll be playing together. As the ladies cooed over Jade, Maggie served tea and an array of delicate cakes. Her baking was legendary in the village, with locals often knocking on her door, hoping for a taste of her delectable creations. While her recipes were a closely guarded secret, her fairy flour, the special ingredient that made her baked goods irresistible, remained a point of local law. As the sun dipped lower, the ladies left, extending warm invitations for tea at their homes. After a final wave, Maggie sank into a chair with a contented sigh, grateful for a moment of peace. Jade had been well behaved, save for one little incident when Mrs. Flounders tried to pinch her cheeks. In a flash of mischief, the chair had collapsed beneath her, leaving her sprawled in the lush grass, her dress comically draped over her face. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me," she'd laughed, trying to recover her dignity. Maggie shot a sharp glance at Jade, who couldn't contain her giggle, and with that look, the giggling ceased. No more mishaps for now. 5 days later, the knocker echoed through the cosy kitchen as Maggie and Jade enjoyed breakfast. With a smile, she opened the door, her heart lifting at the sight of familiar faces. "Oh, how wonderful to see you all again. This little poppet has kept me on my toes, objects levitating, things going missing, lights flickering on when she doesn't want to sleep. Just before you arrived, her mashed broccoli turned into mud." "I hope no one else witnessed this," Jarid exclaimed, eyes wide. "Not a soul," Maggie replied, a twinkle in her eye. "I've managed to keep her antics under wraps for now, but this little one has a mind of her own, don't you, sweetie?" "Well, we're here now," Ilona declared, her voice resolute. "Today marks the beginning of her guidance. She has much to learn and must not draw attention to herself, especially not use magic in front of anyone." Once everyone was settled, they gathered in the living room, cloaked in shadows, the curtains drawn tight, candles flickering to life, and the doors bolted securely. Jade was nestled in a small basket, placed on the wooden table in the centre of the room. Each fairy stepped forward, their staffs glimmering in the dim light, hovering above Jade's head. I, Lamore, by the power bestowed upon me by Loxia and the element of fire, anoint you with the essence of love, beauty, and passion. I, Destan, by the power gifted to me by Phaon and the element of wind, anoint you with fate, fortune, and the destructive forces that guide us. I, Ilona, by the power from Rostal and the element of water, anoint you with insight, illumination, and wisdom. I, Bravley, by the power inherited from Goldrun and the element of earth, anoint you with strength, courage, and humility. I, Jarid, by the combined powers of Goldrun, Phaon, Rostal, and Loxia, and by the 4 elements of earth, wind, fire, and water, anoint you with the power to preserve. In that moment, the air crackled with energy as a kaleidoscope of colours swirled around the room, a tempest of magic unleashed. Suddenly, silence enveloped them, the room cloaked in darkness. Jade began to glow a vibrant green, and as the light faded, Maggie turned on the lamps, her breath hitching in her throat. Jade lay peacefully asleep in her basket, a serene smile playing on her lips, but a faint frown marred her brow. Gently, Maggie lifted her and tucked her into the crib. The fate of the fairy folk now rested upon this small child's shoulders, but thankfully her guardians would support her. What was done could not be undone. As Maggie turned to the fairies hovering protectively above the crib, she noticed the worry etched on their faces. With a heavy heart, she turned towards the kitchen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she contemplated the weight of the world resting on such fragile shoulders.